Fail.
So, welcome everybody. We will start our second webinar on is it possible to management to be educative practice. Today, I have the pleasure to join us Professor Oliver Laasch, Professor Cunliffe, and Professor Paolo Landri. And our dynamics of today you received in your email. So we'll do a short presentation of the motivation of this webinar, and then I will pass the second moment to Oliver, and then to Anne, and last but not least, Paulo. After their talk, we will open breakout rooms for you all can discuss with each other. And then after this moment, we will have the final stage where we can do final comments and questions, okay? So welcome everybody. Let me share with you my slides. So, okay. So the paper that raised this question is this one that you can see in your screen. So the idea is, considering our context right now, the great challenge that we have, the raising discourse of companies about sustainability and responsible management, business ethics, and so on and so forth. I started to reflect about this possibility. If the discourse, management discourse, is in alignment of management practice regarding responsibility. So what is of the top of my head is the problem of agreeing that management is a sort of neutral, rational, technical, and non-political practice. So I think that it's a very problematic way to understand and to see management, because it is a way to avoid, to tackle the problems that we need to understand and to deal with it. So other 2 points interesting to mention here is the problem of the notion of efficiency, because we don't know exactly what is inside and outside of it. And efficiency is a concept that is very core for management scholars and management practitioners as well. So this is another reflection that we need to raise and debate on it. And another point is, we live in a world that we have comparing values. At first, we see things that are very harmonic and in a sort of equilibrium, but in practice, we are always we always have comparing values and interests, and we need to tackle them and talk about them. That's why I take advantage of the notion of phronesis, because phronesis is a concept that invite us to think about an ethics, but it's not exactly an ethics that is in a preconcept way of doing things, but how we can perform things in different ways, in different contexts, aiming the common good. So this is, let's say, the perspective that I adopted to think about how management could be educational practice or a responsible practice. So the thesis is management only will be responsible if we comprise a educational experience. What does it mean? It means that we don't change people understandings, behaviors, and practice without changing the ways that they perceive the world. So what I mean is, it's not only with adopting uh, responsibility as an assumption in business schools curriculum to overcome the problems that we face. Oliver wrote sometime in some place that we need to look not only to responsible management as something that we think about it, but we need to uh, reflect on it on practice. So it was very provocative to me in that time. So I'm in agreeing with him in that text about it. So that's why I bring to the discussion the notion of education. So I'm using the idea of responsible managing instead of management because I'm in a process way of doing it. That's why the reason of a practice. And I guess that the principle is to enabling just not only shareholders and stakeholders, but all people to dealing with these competing priorities, you know? So this is a very important thing. Discuss what we are considering as priority to discuss what could be a common good. So to summarize the idea, we have in the center in this figure the responsible management as educational practice, and we have three, in a dynamic way, three, let's say, three practitioners or way of practicing this responsible management. So, okay, business schools are important to this. I'm sure about it because we need to talk about it inside the business school. However, we need to consider this curriculum with societal demands and also put these demands and the curriculum and the organizations, all sorts of organizations, in a sort of dynamics discussion of these values that are and interests that are competing with each other. Okay, so this is the main idea of the paper that I bring to you to start our conversation. So I'm stopping right now, and I will pass the moment to Oliver to introduce yourself and make your comments. Welcome, Oliver, and feel free to expose your ideas. Thank you.
Yes, Marcelo, thank you very much. And of course, thank you also for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to present with some of my heroes in the academic world as well. I think it's a very great webinar series that you have set up here. Let me just see how I can put this one on full screen. I always struggle with this bar down here in Zoom. I think here we go. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Good. So I took the liberty of rephrasing the question a little bit because when I read your paper, it did a couple of things in my head, which I found very interesting. I thought some of them might even be worth sharing. So you will recognize some of the elements of your original question. Let me see if I can get rid of this bar down here. Do you still see this bar? Yes, you do, right? Is it still in the way? Or am I only seeing this? Yes,
we
let
see
me see
just the first one.
Let's see what's the least bothersome location for it. Let's do this then. And I did attend the last session of this seminar where Silvia Gerardi brought up this very interesting point, critical point about what we see on this image here. So isn't it too trivial? Isn't it something that just doesn't matter, that's not important? And what are the intentions behind putting a sign like this on a towel rack and thinking, ooh, we're doing responsible management? And is anybody actually learning anything from it? And that's where I would like to start, and that's also where I would like to end with those couple of slides. And the question there is really, I'm moving from education to learning, and I'm moving from what Marcelo just presented there, a type of societal learning, to a type of post-human learning. So not as in societies being groups or societal aspects being related to people or groups of people, human beings, but rather to go beyond just human beings. So let's quickly see where that gets us to. So just as a quick, I'm going through my own stream of thought there, but I think some of it might be interesting. So where I start in that discussion is really the question of where does learning happen, and where should learning happen possibly, and where should we put our emphasis on learning. And one thing that we've been as a group been trying to do for a while is to move that whole discussion of responsible education towards responsible learning, and particularly to learning in the workplace context. So what Marcelo is suggesting there, that you might have practicing responsible management as something that is an educational practice, is very, very intriguing to me. And that, of course, relates also to this work that Sylvia and I have been doing, Sylvia Girardi and I had been doing together, but we didn't get yet through to publishing it. But this idea of moving the emphasis of our inquiry into how learning, responsible management learning, happens from the academic field into the managerial field, and to look at exactly what Marcelo is doing in that paper. How might learning happen, and how might there be an educational intent behind learning also in the managerial field while we're practicing responsible management, not only while we are thinking, researching it, talking about it in the academic field. So then if this is all about learning, well, of course, we would need to agree on what we mean with learning. And as you see here, indicated by all of the different colors, I don't expect anybody to read all this. There are many, many different versions of what learning is according to different people out there. And the version that I think makes most sense to use in that context here is this idea of learning as something that, first of all, doesn't only happen in humans, or not even necessarily only between humans, if you think of social intersubjective learning types, but rather something that is a learning that is social material, that goes beyond humans, that is post-human, if you want so, or social material that happens in social material networks, as one of the other ways of framing that perspective on learning. And it means that those networks, they change in capacity, if you think about not learning process, but learning outcomes. So all of a sudden, those actor networks or social material networks, they can do something they weren't able to do. They behave differently because of something that happened to them. So there might be a learning that is far away from being human-centered. Of course, this bar is always in the way. So this builds, or that connects also to the understanding that Sylvia and I developed of what responsible management practice can be, or what we can study it as, if you want to go towards an epistemological understanding. And that would be responsible management practices as being a post-human practice, a practice that is not necessarily human-centric. So responsible management can be enacted, and is always enacted, by networks that are not entirely human. And there might even be some responsible management enacting networks that are more non-human than human. And this is what we mean with post-humanist responsible management practice. So that, again, moving it back to the learning question, that then means that if we do have responsible management being enacted by humans and non-humans and all of the other versions in between and beyond that, then the network needs to learn. The network needs to learn, and it can learn through those practices that touches all that touch on and that mobilize the entire network. Very nasty type of figure, that one, but what I would like to express with it is really that what is learning then? So learning becomes an act of translation. So translation between the different actors, human and non-human actors in those networks. And if you're interested in the nitty-gritty of how that can happen, that paper might be quite interesting. So in the lower part, you see how learning of that kind of network, or that network learning, happens across different episodes of translation, and the upper part is then what those very concrete episodes of translation looked like in one example. And this was about learning to eat sustainably. One of our students was going through that process and reported it, and we then coded this in order to better understand that process. But that seems relatively far away already from the educational angle, but also from the vignettes that Marcelo is using in his paper. So moving a little bit further back towards the education angle. Well, typically when I speak with people about education and read about education, there are those two main perspectives on it, or two main elements that people typically mention. So the one is that it seems to be some kind of systematic intentional instruction. So there seems to be something that's controlled and intentional behind it. And then there is the second part, which often relates to teaching as an intentional activity per se, where we're trying to help people learn. So what does that mean then, coming all the way back to the initial question? So that means that in a network, even as trivial as putting as the practice of putting your towel back onto the rack, and the human managerial aspect of it, of somebody deciding that we're going to put a sign there that helps then our customers as another human actor in this network to do what we think is more sustainable. So in that actor network, well, that silly sign that you're putting up there, and the towel itself, they're actually becoming educatants. I'm just making up words there. So drawing from the idea of an actant, so a non-human actor, if you want. So that then means, well, actually, even examples that at least Sylvia was quite critical about, and very and thought maybe that really qualifies not as an act of education and responsible management, at least in this vignette, isn't educative or educational. Well, actually, I would argue it is. So that would mean that responsible managing can actually be a post-human learning and education, not only where that network of actors, human and non-human, learns and changes the reality of how responsible management is being done, but also there can be some intention. So particularly if you're tying that back into ideas of inscription, so a human being who might intentionally inscribe a certain message and a certain action related to that message, and affordances related to that inscription into something like this relatively silly sign there. I feel like I'm speeding up too much, and I probably have still taken too much time already, so I will better stop that here.
Very good, Oliver. Thank you so much for your reflections. Very nice. I enjoyed. So, welcome, my friend. Feel free to start your reflections with us.
Okay. I just have one slide. Are you able to see that okay?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. So I sort of looked at this perspective. Let me say, first of all, that I'm not a practice person. And that may become clear as I just talk through some of the issues here. But I thought, for me, one of the ways of tackling this question is by examining what does it mean to be responsible. So in his article, Marcelo talks about acting responsibly involves an educational and a learning experience, but one that extends beyond the business school in terms of an ability to share that learning and to act in responsible ways. So what I wanted to do in the 10 minutes that I have is just build on his thesis of responsible managing as an educational practice to say that for me, being responsible and managing responsibly is really a way of being in the world. And for me, ontology and understanding ontology is key to that. So for many years, I taught an executive leadership course on an executive MBA program. And I began with this issue of ontology. And what I mean by that is thinking about what is the nature, or what do I believe is the nature of social and organizational realities? And then what does it mean, therefore, to be human in that world? And that, I think, is a really important question. It's a question that managers and leaders in organizations should be thinking about, and also that we should be thinking about in management, education, and learning. And it's a key question because it impacts, our answer to that question impacts then how we manage people, how we think of the relationship between the organization and the community and the natural world. A number of years ago, I was in a conference and somebody asked what I think was a very important question. And that question was, would you rather be treated as a human resource, a human asset, or a human being? Now, we just think about those are, certainly common terms in organizations, but if we think about what the impact of that language has in terms of, managing people and also being responsible, if we think of human resources, a resource is something to be used. If we think of a human asset, an asset is, something on a balance sheet. And if we use those terms, then we tend to treat people as objects, as a what, and not a who. And as Marcelo points out, that in many education and training programs, that's what they're all about. People are treated as objects. So what if we begin to think of ourselves and others as human beings? Then how does that impact how we manage organizations and how we think about our responsibility to others? So, for me, a way of thinking about this and of coming into this issue of responsibility is through an intersubjective ontology. So thinking about ourselves, not just as individuals, as subjective beings in the world, not as objects, but as people who are always in relation with others. And, one way of thinking about this is through Merleau-Ponty's, he gives a really good example in the phenomenology of perception. And he talks about two hands touching each other. And he says, which hand is touching and which is being touched? If we think about our interactions, our conversations with people, and we begin to think about them in that way, that we work intersubjectively, responsively, and responsibly to and with others. So, thinking about ourselves in this intersubjective way, then it means for me that we have a responsibility with others to treat each other in ethical ways. And being reflexive is the key to this. So questioning what we take for granted, what assumptions that we're making in relation to people, to the world around us, and their impact. So this is not the muscular critical version of reflexivity, but reflexivity as a way of being in the world. So just moving on from that, I have a a second point, hopefully, whoops. And that is thinking about then, what is responsibility? What does it mean to be responsible to and with others? And I go back to a comment made by Paul Ricoeur in Oneself as Another. And again, when I'm teaching managers and we're talking about ethics and we're talking about this issue, then we have a discussion around this quote. So Ricoeur says, let us define ethical intention as aiming at the good life with and for others in just institutions. And I think this addresses our responsibility for others. So Ricoeur sort of develops a moral philosophy and a moral sociality, because he addresses how moral values and rules play through our relationships and the way that we live our lives for others. And this is a really interesting quote for me. This is what managers and leaders in organizations should be discussing. So what do we mean by the good life? Good life for whom? With and for others. What does that mean? In just institutions, what is a just institution? And what responsibility does that bring? So Ricoeur's notion of ethical intention is the core of ethical selfhood, because it really is at the heart of who we are. And he extends Aristotle's notion of phronesis, you know, the practical wisdom that we need to enhance our happiness and our quality of life. Because he argues that self, understanding who we are, and moral character are really the cornerstone of ethics, and for me, of responsibility. So he talks about, what does that mean? So what is our ethical intention? What is our responsibility? He says, well, it's being true to our word. It's being capable of evaluating our actions, believing that they're ethical and good, conducting ourselves in a way that others may count on us. So in other words, we are true to our word. Being responsible and ethical is also about respecting the uniqueness of others. Respecting that uniqueness is a value. Viewing people as irreplaceable, not as assets or resources, but human beings, and caring about them. And this leads on to the issue of, okay, if we begin to see others and ourselves in this way, then what does it mean to manage with justice and equality? So what does a just institution look like? And I think that these are the sorts of conversations that we should be having in management, education, and learning around what does it mean to be responsible as a manager, as a leader in an organization, or as a human being. So I'll stop there. I realize I've just run out of time, but hopefully, thinking about this from a different perspective, it's not just a practice, but it's about who we are in the world, who we see ourselves as, and that's key to enacting our responsibility.
Very good, Anne. Thank you for your talk. I think that the best thing of this series of webinars are the different perspectives that we have to deal with responsibility. And it's intriguing me because when we are talking about it, common days, in our daily life. I mean, I have the sense that everybody knows what does it mean responsible and responsibility, you know. But of course, I noticed that they are talking about different things. But but the feeling is that everybody knows what does it mean to being responsible. So I'm very excited with this debate because of it. And that's why I think we need to put the debate forward, and we need to open this box and see the differences and debate about all these differences to reflect about our own practice. I mean, our everybody, including institutions, managers, companies, so on and so forth. But okay, right now I will invite you to join the breakout rooms. Okay, I will stay here with Oliver and Anne, and you are free to debate in the rooms and raise questions if you want, or comments. And after 15 minutes, I will invite you to come back and invite some persons to share your comments and questions. And I will give again the opportunity to Oliver and to comment about your questions and ideas, okay? When we finish. So now I will invite Paolo Landri to talk about his ideas about responsible management. Paolo, my friend, welcome. Feel free to share your ideas with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcelo. I'm sorry of this, in a way, misalignment across the agenda. But anyway, my talk will be about trying to do some comments and feedbacks from reading Marcelo's papers on the idea of the responsible managing, and especially related to the question of how to relate, the question of management with the question of education. I will do it because, in a way, my experience was interesting to some extent, because I was in both camps. It seemed meaning that I was in organization studies for the first part of my academic careers, and then I moved into education studies. So in a way, I'm in a situation where I know both vocabularies, so I can understand also the different vocabularies, and in some way the different aspect of using maybe the same words, but with a complete different meanings. In a way, I can say that at some point I decided to move from organization studies to education studies for a precise reason, because my field of studies was especially school organization, university, educational organization. So in a way, it seems to me that there was something missing in the literature of organization studies, and there was a difficulties in providing me with some vocabularies that can help me to give a deeper understanding of the dynamics of education. And the reason was also because I was very much interested in considering education as an institutions. So because basically I was an organizational scholar, but mostly my background was in sociology of education. So I'm very much interested in giving a full account of the of education as an institution. So so this is the premise. And the first question is related to the things that sometimes education is not considered well, as a word, as a concept in organization studies. There is sometimes a sort of uneasiness of using the term education. The reason why was that in a way education is considered as a conservative term, which is it is true, in some way, but it is also a very small account of what is about education. If you go through education and the philosophy of education, the pedagogy, and also the sociology of education, you have many definitions of what is education. For example, in the paper, and there was even no agreement between scholars about what is exactly education. Recently, there is a renewed importance on the question of learning. So there is a sort of substitution with the idea of education with the idea of learning. But it is very important to understand that there is no equivalence, as I will try to argue with a philosopher called Vista, that there is no coincidence between education and learning. Learning is a part of education, but in a way, according to to debate on education, education is not just learning; it's something more. And of course, in Marcelo's paper, Marcelo draws on the Dewey definition of education, which is fine. It's a very authoritative definition of education, but there are many. And one of the definitions that I like most is exactly the definition given by Gert Biesta, because that he develops in his literature, in his works, a theory of what is education. According to Biesta, education is related to three elements. Is related to qualification, the socialization, and the subjectification. It means that qualification is about learning skills, for example, of competencies. And this is something that is we can do at school, for example. But the other aspect of education is related to socialization. It means that you learn something about the tradition and the value of the place where you live. It is about the integration of someone into a culture, broadly speaking. But according to Vista, the most educational in the discourse of education is exactly the subjectification. Why it is so? Because Vista draws not only on Dewey, but also on Hannah Arendt. And for Hannah Arendt, it's very important to think about that education is about inheriting the world, but at the same time it's also renewing the world. So it's about the new to emerge. It means that it's related to the subjects. It's related to the birth of new subjects. So education is not something that it is conservative. It can be progressive in the sense that it has to do with the renewal of the world. There is also another interesting scholar called Lynn Fendler. In one of an interesting article, she also reflects on a theory that when a theory can be considered educational. And according to Fendler, educational, as an objective, imply three elements again. It implies exceeding, it implies generating, and it implies vibrating. It means that education, when something is educational, and so we can think about that management can be educational, if it exceeds, the actual situation, and so when it can be generative of new way of thinking, and when it can vibrate, it can make the subject vibrate. So this is very important, and of course, in a way, coming to the question put on the table by Marcelo and by his paper, you can consider the notion of responsible management as educational practice, and it is fine. It means that managing can be educational, but not always. It means that we can say that management is a problem, it's not just a problem-solving activity. And also it is not just related to the maximization of profit, but it is related to the question of exceeding the actual situation of the managing as a model of rationality and instrumentality. However, I do not oppose control to education, as it appears somewhere, in your paper, Marcelo, because according to Foucault, for example, in my view, education also has to do with the government. So in a way, it is related to the question of include a wide range of control technique that make the subject governable. It means that, in order for a subject to emerge, you need a technique of control. So there is an important issue that relates the freedom, but also the necessity, in a way. There is a double, sometimes a paradoxical situation, because in order to be a subject, you have to be some way to subject to the power, to techniques of control. Without, a dispositive, no subject can emerge in a way. So in a way, education is also can be generative, can be a dispositive of power for a subject to emerge. So we can say that education can be management can be educational, to say with Fendler, when it is aimed at exceeding, generating, and vibrating. So when it is when it relates to subjectivation, ethics, and also care. What I do not find, in your paper, Marcelo, was the experience of the conflicts. The point that I would like to make and also to discuss with the audience was that education is not just, it seems to be, descripted, in your paper as responsible managing was something peaceful, while it is not. Sometimes it is related with the conflict, with experience of dissensus. And probably the reason why that for me it is fine, considering responsible management as educational activity, I'm not completely sure, with the expression of educative management, because it seems to me a paradox, an oxymoron. Even if it is like, I would prefer to use the term to raise, to underline the importance of put on the floor the question of the educational dimension of management. Even because, in a way, the educational dimension has an autonomy with respect to the societal expectation. As I said before, education regards cosmopolitics, the making and the remaking of new world. And I would say, by following Latour, that it may be seen also as a sort of diplomatic activity, something related to managing also the conflicts, between different realm and different scale of value. Lastly, I would like just to conclude by saying that something that I do not find was, I was wondering why you have not explored also the idea of leadership. That for me it was strange in a way. You know very well that in the educational study there was plenty big literature on the educational leadership. In a way, at least for me, you are raising the point of the importance for any organization to have an educational leadership, in the good sense of the word, a leadership that is oriented to the transformation, to the ethics, to the care. And there is a part, of course, of this literature that is ideologically, you are right, but at the same time, there is also a part of this literature of educational leadership that is critical. And so I can see this literature more aligned with the scope, with the aim and the scope of your paper. So thank you very much for your paper, and I hope that the discussion could go on and by establishing a more dialogue between, you know, organizational studies and educational studies. Thank you.
Great, Paolo. Thank you so much for your comments. So let's try to do a round of comments and questions, and before we finish the webinar. So Zagallo, yes.
Okay, I opened the camera, so
Thank you.
you, Marcelo, thank you, Paolo, and Oliver. I'm interested in the connection, Professor Paolo. Did you do with the work of Hannah Arendt? I like very much some concepts about the human being condition, about the action, the labor, and other concepts. If you could talk a little bit more about your exploration of Hannah Arendt's work.
Yeah.
Okay. Paolo, let's see if we have other questions to save some time. Is it okay? So we have this one from Zagallo. Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? Frederick? Welcome.
Yeah, I just had a clarification question for Paolo. When you're talking about subjectification, are you talking about it in the Foucauldian sense of the word or in another sense of the word?
Great. Thank you, Frederick. Another one? No? So
Marcelo, there's one in the chat.
Okay. Okay, from Rubens. Okay. Oliver and Paolo, can you see the question in the chat? Okay.
Yes, I'm reading the question. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my suggestion is we can start with Paolo, okay, because we have these two questions. And then I invite Anne and Oliver to comment as well. Okay, is it okay? So, Paolo, feel free to start.
Okay, thank you for your question. About Hannah Arendt, of course, we could do a seminar, you know, on Hannah Arendt, and it could be very interesting. But basically, you know, for the purpose of the discussion that we are having, you know, now, I think that his definition of education is very, very much interesting, because it relates education with the question of the inheritance between the generation. So it has to do with selecting something that it is worth to pass to the next generation. And first of all, second, it has to do with the question about the world we inherit. That could be, as Hannah Arendt would say, would decay without the participation of the new generation of people. So it is not just a definition that underlines the need to reproduce the world, but it has to do, according to Hannah Arendt, with the phenomenon of the natality. And in fact, she used exactly the word of natality by saying that it is not just a question of inherit, but also to help people to have her voice, you know, or his or her voice, and to become new subjects. So I like very much, you know, because it relates in a way, you know, education is not just related to the question of learning, but it's related to the existential question, you know, about new subject to emerge. So I like it very much, because often when we talk about education, it's just about the cognitive aspect. It's just related to competencies, usually measurable competencies. So all the questions related to the complexity of the subjects disappear, you know, in the discourse. While I think that Hannah Arendt beautifully put on the floor the complexity of the process of subjectivization and the need to renew the world, to give the voice and the room to others to come into the world. So I think it's very important. The second question, and I hope to have clarified, you know, in the way I like, you know, this definition.
Yes, yeah, very good. Thank you.
The second aspect about the use of subjectification, yes, it is related to the Foucauldian reading of the subjects. And it's very important because in the Foucauldian discourse, subject is, as I said, is related to the power. But power in Foucault, according to I'm not a Foucauldian, but I know, you know, the Foucauldian text, it is about the control, especially the first Foucauldian text. But if you go through the latest text of Foucault, Foucault is introduced this notion of the souci de soi. You know, in French it means the let's say the care for the self. You know. So it is related to a generative aspect of the emergence of the subjects. You know, so it is a question of course you are subject to a power, but with the power there is also resistance. You know, each power has a resistance, and where there is a resistance, there is a possibility for a new subject, again, like in Hannah Arendt, to emerge, you know, with the new things, to new subjectivities to emerge. I think that, you know, Hannah Arendt and Foucault are very useful because they are not thinking about education and the power and the subject as something that is already done, but it is something that is paradoxically and dilemmatic process that are open to the new, you know, and to the new subjectivities.
Great. So, Anne and Oliver would like to comment what Paolo said, or go directly to Ruben's Amaro question?
I'd just like to add, I like Paolo's comment that, you know, education and learning, whatever we want to call it, is an existential question. And, you know, I think this is critical, and it's something that is not recognized within organization and management studies. I've written about this, but one of the sort of wow moments for me that made me think about this issue is something that John Schotter said in his Conversational Realities book. And he said that the basic practical moral problem in life is not what to do, but who to be. In other words, we need to answer who we are in the world before we decide what to do. And the problem with management, education, and learning is that we focus on the what to do, not the who to be. And that, for me, is the missing link. It's critical. And this is why I begin with ontology, which addresses that question of who to be.
Thank you. Oliver?
Yes, I've got 2 points that I find very exciting that I would like to share real quick. Just connecting to what Anne said there about ontology, that's something that I think was very present in all 3 of the presentations. Also, Paolo, although you talked about definitions, I think there was an ontological taste to those definitions. What is education? What is learning? What is the nature of existence of it? And also, when I participated in the last session a couple of weeks ago, that's exactly where the breakout rooms went to as well. So I think there's something else really important to explore on that deeper ontological level of what we're doing here. So I've got no wisdom there. I'm just posing a question. What else should we be talking about really in that context? The other part I think that I think is really important also for what we do and how we do things is Paolo's point about tensions, about violence, about conflict in education. At least in my understanding and my limited research that I've done empirically, it's always that tension that actually evokes the learning. So if there's no tension, no learning happens. And we might even very actively induce tensions in order to make learning happen, although it's not something pleasant. It is something that we need for learning, the way I understand it. And I think in the responsible management context, there's much more work to do, because if we just take that very simple and mundane tension of I'm going back to the towel now, and I'm having the sign there and saying, well, you should actually not put the towels on the floor. I want you, sorry, that's behavior change type of learning once again, but I want you to learn that, human actor. So the sign tells me that. So there's a tension already in that very little setting, because it's inconvenient to do things differently from how we used to do them. So you have a tension there already. But I think there's much bigger tension that I think is the crucial tension that we should be focusing on. And this is that if we're doing responsible management education right, we're trying to find those tensions where we are able to pitch an old logic of management practice that is outdated, that is dangerous, that's getting us into trouble. So growth as a logic undergirding many management practices, pitching that against a new, better, more desirable in some way managerial logic. I think this is the tension that we should be seeking. And there it becomes really messy. And I often notice that in the classroom, that particularly if it's practicing managers who have a lot of experience, it's type of habits, it's so deeply ingrained in them that they cannot think outside that growth logic, and they cannot manage, they cannot practice outside that growth logic, although they rationally know that there are limits to growth. And that's I think that's the tension that we should be seeking much more. It's messy, it's unpleasant. You're being called names in the classroom. You're being called unreasonable, and somebody who's far away from practice and doesn't know anything about management. But I think that although that happens, I think that's the kind of tension that we should be seeking.
Very nice. We have time for a last comment. If any of you, the panelists or the audience, would like to do a comment, feel free. Otherwise, I just want to say that I enjoyed a lot again this panel, this webinar. Thank you so much, Oliver and Paolo. As well, I said before to Joe, Sylvia, and Ted. I think that we did very nice work bringing out lots of perspectives on responsibility, learning, education. And this is the most important thing to me as a researcher, to show that we need to understand that we are not in the same line, everyone, we have different perspectives, and we need to discuss these perspectives, and you need to reflect and debate the practice that we are doing as, let's say, managers, because the distance between the discourse and what we see sometimes are very distant from each other. So this is the main point to me, and it regards to values, and it regards to the tensions and the tackles that we need to face. Okay, so thank you so much. Appreciate it a lot. And for those that are interested, the webinars will be available on YouTube as soon as possible. Okay, both of them, and we will share the links with you all. Okay, so thank you a lot. Have a nice day for you all. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcelo, for organizing.
Bye bye.
Theo.